Hey, and welcome back to my 5-part series on conducting effective political investigations that can expose unfit political candidates and keep them from getting elected. Like many of you, I'm fed up with unfit political candidates getting elected to office who, intoxicated by their power and hell-bent on forcing everyone to live the way they want us to, are gutting our rights to health care, voting, and public education, while punishing anyone who does not look like them, act like them, or believe in the things they believe in. In the first video of this 5-part series, I introduced you to the basic elements involved in conducting a political investigation, and most importantly, how to do them effectively enough to convince voters not to vote for those candidates willing to use their power to harm our communities. In today's video, the second in our series, we'll cover how to build an investigation using the different types of public records, what sources are most effective, the types of information you can find, and how to access those records. In the videos that follow, we're going to cover how to identify and interview people with information about the unfit candidate and to help them feel comfortable going public, how to assess the information you develop in your investigation, and finally, how to package the information to give it to the media and bloggers or to bring directly to the voters. Hi, I'm Mike Corwin. I train democratically aligned interest groups and individuals how to reshape local elections by investigating and exposing to the voters political candidates who are unfit for office. I've been featured in Professional Investigator magazine and Politico magazine, both of whom sought me out to write articles for their readers on conducting political investigations. I started out conducting investigations to build cases for attorneys in 1988 in Los Angeles, California. In 2002, I began conducting political investigations in New Mexico, where I impacted the outcome of hundreds of races by the time I retired in 2019. I actually used this approach that I teach myself when I ran for the State House in New Mexico in 2004 and seriously outperformed and overperformed the typical results for Democrats running in the overwhelmingly Republican district where I lived. And if you're ready to get started investigating, I've got a great gift for you, my free political investigation checklist. Here you'll find the sources of information that I used to investigate and expose unfit candidates and to keep them from winning elections. To get started, just click on the link in the description below. Now, let's dig in. So now we're going to get started with a look at what are probably the most important records, at least to get started with your investigation. Once you've gone ahead and gone through the candidate's self-reported information, we want to start by going through public records. Each state has slightly different public records laws. Some states make more records available, other states make fewer records available, and in a case like Florida, where DeSantis is spending all his time trying to prevent records about what he's doing from becoming public, they're actually closing down what records are public. Just because a record is out there that's public, that you have difficulty achieving, doesn't mean you can't find that information through another source. It may even be a walking, talking source. And as I mentioned later in this, we're going to talk about how to interview people who have information. So know that there's multiple ways to achieve the results that you want. And perhaps it might come from newspaper articles, which aren't public record, but they're really more publicly available information. You just have to be kind of creative about how you approach finding it. You really need to be open-minded and not think, oh, I must do it this way. There's different ways, different approaches, and sometimes you'll butt up against a brick wall. But the key isn't to slam your car into that brick wall. The key is to go around it and look for other ways to get the same information. Now, when it comes to public records, I find the most valuable information often comes from court records. These can be civil cases, these can be criminal cases, these can be bankruptcy. They can be court records related to businesses that the candidate operates. Just as an example, Donald Trump's businesses filed multiple bankruptcies. It's the information in those bankruptcy petitions that could lead you to, let's say, people who were burned by him that could then go public. Each state has slightly different ways that they operate their court systems. Some states are going to be online, and you can conduct court record searches right there online. You may not be able to view the actual document, though in some places you can. And typically in federal court, which operates a system called PACER, you can review those documents. But if need be, as long as you can identify them, then you'll be able to go to the actual courthouse, request the file, and review and get copies of those records. On the civil side, it's based upon the dollar amount of litigation. And so the higher dollar values will be in a superior court, a district court, a higher level case. The lower level, for example, like small claims court type levels, will be in a lower level. It might be in a municipal court, which is a city court. It might be a magistrate court, which is a lower level court within that county system. Courts are typically maintained on a county level, and so you always want to start with the counties where this person has lived and to do your searches. Sometimes you may have to request a search in writing because they don't have an online search mechanism. And you also want to make sure that you're going far enough back. If the candidate is 30 years of age, I recommend going back to at least to when they were 18. But keep in mind, if the candidate is 60, that's a lot more territory to cover. Now, you will run into an occasional challenge where in some states they're beginning to seal criminal records if a person was either not convicted or if they were convicted and they served their sentence and have not gotten in further trouble. In some states, a person actually has to file a lawsuit in order to seal those records, and that's beneficial. In other states, they do that through a closed process. And so you may or may not find records. Now, keep in mind, a lot of times the local newspaper has a court blotter where they report, so you may be able to search their records to find cases that are now no longer available in the court filings. You may not be able to get everything related to that, but you'll at least get some of the information that you need. In some states, police reports are public record from the get-go. In other states, it requires a person to have been charged to have that record be available and be releasable from a police department. And in other cases, as long as the person is a witness or some other capacity, maybe a complainant, you can still get access to those records. So it's also important, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, about getting to police records, because that may be a way around an expungement if you encounter that situation. In addition to civil and criminal and bankruptcy records, there are also family law records. Now, family law includes divorces, it includes child custody issues, maybe not paying child support, those types of things. And it also includes domestic violence filings. Now, this is a little interesting. Some states have restricted access, or at least not put them out to where you can see them publicly when it involves domestic violence. Now, why they would choose to protect the potential abuser, I don't know. One argument might be maybe that it's a false accusation. But still, those states that are making it harder to find these records are actually protecting the potential abuser. But typically, you can request that they do a search for those records at the counter. They just aren't putting them online for you to find. Now, the argument is that they don't want a victim's address information disclosable to the public in an easy way. So that's why many of these places are taking these records offline. However, that's usually not the case because they typically seal separately the address information anyhow. Just because somebody is running for office doesn't mean they haven't faced those types of accusations. I did a case involving a sheriff or deputy sheriff in New Mexico who actually had not just a domestic violence complaint filed against him, but multiple police reports that detailed what was involved in these allegations. In addition to that, there was a candidate running for the state legislature who, in his divorce filings, had a link to a domestic violence filing that had been taken out of the website. It was still publicly available, but it listed and identified the case information. And within that, I was able to track down that information and use that in a campaign to get the media and in direct mailing campaigns to show what was behind this person. You want to check again, as I mentioned, for the business filings, and particularly for bankruptcies. You want to look under the business name as well as the individual, because with an individual, they typically file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, but businesses typically do a Chapter 11 or a Chapter 13. And it may just appear under the business name. So you want to search those. And again, federal court is very searchable. It's a system called PACER, P-A-C-E-R, and that's an online system. You can also go to the federal court, either the bankruptcy court or the district court, and conduct searches there as well. For that, we also want to look for property records, ownership on mortgages, property holdings, whether they are the head of household and have an exemption for that. One of the situations that comes up in races, and they're difficult to prove, but in some races they have a residency requirement where you're supposed to live in your district that you're running, and there are times that candidates do not. They may operate a property, or they may have a second home that perhaps they even rent out within that district. It's very difficult to prove that a person doesn't live within their district. It requires a much more extensive investigation. But so that you know, the place to begin that is the county assessor's office, because they will show the properties owned and they'll list the type of exemption. Is it a head of household exemption? That's the type of exemption when it's your primary residential property. You don't qualify for that exemption if it's not your primary residential property. Now, the other place where you'll find property records is the county recorder's office. For example, if somebody has work done on a home and doesn't pay their contractor, the contractor would file their mechanic's lien against the homeowner at the county clerk's office. So the county clerk's office has a wide variety of records. There you'll find mortgages for a property. You'll find deeds where their transactions are done. To the county clerk's office, in some states, most states as a matter of fact, a business that's not incorporated and does not have the owner's name within that business name will have to file a fictitious business statement, also called a DBA. And the DBA will include information about where the business is based, who's involved in the business, and the nature of the business. And that may also identify names that you can use to research and look for different business entities connected to the individual you're researching. In addition to that, you want to check local business licenses, because there you can make connections on businesses that don't necessarily show up in other business type filings. So your city government or at the county level may require a business license, and there you can review the actual paperwork that they file that will list the nature of the business, where it operates from, who's involved with the business. In addition to that, there are other business records that are filed, SOS, Secretary of State's office, and that type of information can include incorporation papers. If you incorporate a business, you're typically filing that at the Secretary of State's office. You may also find UCC filings. When a business gets a loan, they typically have to identify the type of business they operate, the type of collateral that they're putting up for that business loan. So you may be able to find some good types of information with those as well. The same with the Secretary of State's office. Some Secretary of State's office, it's easy to search a person's name and pull up all of the businesses associated with it. other Secretary of State's office, you kind of have to have the business name in order to then find who's involved with that. A couple of ways that you can do this. If they have an online search system, you go ahead and put their name into the search or their business name into the search, and you conduct those searches. Others, you may have to go down to that location, or you may have to make a written request in writing and then request that they conduct those searches for you. Once records have been found, you want to then go and actually pull the specific documents. You want to make a written request to see those documents. And the reason for that is those documents are specific to whatever information you're going to bring forward, and they are corroboration of what you're bringing forward. Now, in a direct appeal to voters about an issue that shows up, let's say it was those domestic violence cases I was talking about, if you have the actual copies of those records, you can use those to convince the media to run with them. You can also use them in your direct appeal to the voters by actually citing those case numbers and even lifting out specific quotes from those filings. It's worth the money. It will cost you copy fees, but you want to get those actual documents. One of the best sources to find a person to interview is through those types of cases. So for example, let's say the person running for office, they were sued by a former business partner who alleged fraud and misrepresentation. Now, this is not a criminal charge where they were charged with that, but they were sued civilly, and the allegations included dishonesty like fraud and misrepresentation. So when you go ahead and you pull the file and you get your copies and you review the file for good quotes, important things that you can use, look also for the names of the people. Now, sometimes an attorney will have filed that, so you might have to reach out to the attorney. Other times, the person who actually filed that case might have their information in there. In addition to the documents that we talked about, many candidates that will run can be a licensed professional. Typically, licensed professionals' licensing files are available to the public to view. You just kind of have to know which offices to go, and that's pretty easy to do. You just simply Google them and say, let's say it's accountant. So you say accounting license + for the state that you want to check in, and you can find the file. And then it's easy enough to get the license number and request to review the file, and then to make copies from that. In addition to that, I do want to mention, in terms of the publicly available information, you have Google searches, which these days can pull up an awful lot of good documents as well. Not necessarily entire case files, but they can pull up some good documents for you, and also some good leads to follow up on to get to the original source documents. In addition to that, most newspapers have what they used to call morgues, where you can do searches. Sometimes they're online, and you're able to search a person or business online within those newspapers and pull up those articles. And those are a great source of information. As a matter of fact, news articles make for great mailers regarding a candidate, because they look very official, and you can kind of pop in the masthead as you do the copy, or cite the article, which gives you a lot of credibility right there. And the other thing that you should consider, even though it's not necessarily your best source, but it's a good source to get started with, and then to leap over and try to track down the primary sources for the information, or the documents for the information, are blog posts. So sometimes you'll have a political blogger, sometimes you'll have community bloggers. Review what they write about those candidates and see if there's any sources that you can then use to follow up with. That's a primer on some of the best documented sources for you to use. And if you're ready to get started investigating, I've got a great gift for you: my free political investigation checklist. Here you'll find the main types of sources of information that I use to expose these unfit candidates to the public and to keep them from winning elections. To get started, just click on the link in the description below.